Hello everyone, welcome again to my channel. So we are still talking about the CRMEF entrance exam. So last time in the previous episode we talked about the interview or the oral exam in terms of the form, in terms of the form. General tips to remember when it comes to the interview, Alright, in this episode we are going to keep talking about the interview or oral, but in this time in terms of the content, in terms of the content. So interview, as I said before, means that you will be sitting opposite a jury, which is composed of usually three members, three members. And these three members can be professors or trainers or even inspectors, This is the jury you will be sitting with, Alright, so here, this jury will be testing and observing your skills and competences in terms of three languages, alright? Number one is English, and number two is Arabic, and number three is French. So here, English, as long as it is your subject, is the subject that you will be teaching in future, so it's the one that takes the longest time, Because you will be asked in English more than the other languages, Now in English, there is a very common question that nearly all juries ask. What is it? Sometimes they ask you at the very beginning, why did you choose this profession? Why did you choose to be a teacher? Now this is something that most of candidates answer with this. I choose to be a teacher because I love it. This is a very common answer, very common answer. I personally don't advise you to answer it this way. Yes, this can be true, but you have to provide the jury with an authentic and reasonable reason. How come you love this profession? For example, you might be inspired by some of your teachers, either in primary or in middle school or in high school or at university. If you give them, for example, this, even with the name and how this teacher has inspired you, etc., this can be a reasonable answer. Otherwise, don't answer it this way. Try to be truthful and honest, So this is one common question that nearly all juries ask, Now, next thing that you have to keep in mind is that you will be, in general, asked in terms of two important themes, Number one, didactics, and number two, pedagogy. Here, as far as these two themes are concerned, you might be asked to give definition for each or to give the difference between these two themes. So I told you before that didactics is specific to a certain subject, So here when we talk about didactics, we are talking about teaching English, Teaching English. But when we talk about pedagogy, pedagogy is general, is related to teaching as a whole, teaching in general, Now, as far as didactics is concerned, you have to remember three important steps that we follow. Number one is planning, the second step is managing, and the last one is assessment. So here, when we talk about planning, we talk about lesson plans. So it is planning before going to the class, So it has to do with lesson plans. And when we talk about lesson plans, we talk about teaching grammar, teaching reading, teaching listening, teaching writing, etc., For example, when we plan for teaching reading, there are some steps that we follow when we teach reading. For example, pre-reading, the while reading stage, and then the post-reading stage, Teaching grammar, for example, we talk about some approaches and steps to follow. For example, we can talk about the PPP model, presenting, practicing, and producing. So this is when we talk about planning, So when we talk about planning, you have to know how to teach these lessons and these skills, Now, managing has to do with monitoring students, controlling the class, and how you manage the activities you do in the classroom. Now, let's talk about assessment. Assessment has to do with quizzes, tests, and with exam. Also, try to know the difference, for example, between evaluation and assessment. So this is what I can say as far as the PMA, planning, managing, and assessment, So here I am giving you just titles, I'm giving you topics, and you can read about that, okay? Another thing that you can keep in mind is teaching methods, okay? And here we are talking about methods and the techniques that we use to teach English, okay? I give you a very essential reference to read, which is Principles and Techniques in Language Teaching. And this is by Larson Freeman, okay? So you can find it as PDF format, download it and read it, okay? Another is Learning Teaching, okay? Learning Teaching, and this is by Jem Scrivener, okay? So these are two very essential references that you can read to develop your knowledge as far as didactics of teaching English, okay? Now, teaching methods like, for example, the audio lingualism. We can also talk about Suggestopedia, we can talk about the TPR, etc. This reference gives you theory about these methods and the practice. Some examples of how you can put these methods into practice. There is a very essential method that you have to remember is what we call the eclectic way or eclecticism. What do we mean by eclecticism or eclectic way? Very simply is to go through all the methods and you choose an idea from each method and you try to combine them in one lesson, okay? In one lesson, which means to take something from each method, because when you study teaching methods, each method has its drawbacks. So one specific method is not enough, Therefore, the best one is the eclecticism, or what we call eclectic way, which means to select from each method and you put them in one lesson, okay, in practice, okay? This is the best way. This is for didactics of teaching English. Now let's talk about pedagogy, and when we talk about pedagogy here, we can talk about learning theories, for example, behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, humanism. So you have to read them, try to get general ideas about them, the pioneer, why did it appear, drawbacks, strengths and weaknesses. You can also learn about classroom management. When we talk about classroom management as far as pedagogy is concerned, we talk about theories. So just Google classroom management theories and you will get a lot of ideas, okay? So this is number 2. Number 3, I'd like you to have a general idea about what we call individual learner differences. You have to bear in mind that when you will be teaching in one class, you will have different students. So the differences that you will have in your students can be easy to notice. For example, age. There are some other kind of differences that you cannot notice from the first glance. For example, personality. So personality is not something which is easy to notice. So it needs contact, okay? Contact and communication with students. So as you get information about student personality, there are some students who are introverted and there are some students who are extroverted, okay? There are some students who are shy, there are some students who are confident, there are some students who are calm, and there are some students who are noisy and talkative. So you have to bear in mind these kind of differences because it's something that you have to consider when you are planning your lesson, okay? When we talk about individual learning differences, we talk about mixed abilities classes. So remember this expression, mixed abilities class, okay? So sometimes in one class you have a lot of abilities. You have, for example, good student, excellent student, average, and you might have weak student. Mixed abilities classes are something that you have to pay attention when it comes to planning and managing your class. So this is as far as individual learner differences. Your learners are different, students are different, and you have to pay attention to that, okay? All right, another thing that you have to consider is what we can call personal development. You are a teacher, so you have to pay attention to your personal development, to develop yourself as a teacher. It doesn't mean that you become a teacher means that you have to stop learning. Never, okay? So you are a teacher, that is the beginning of learning. Personal development, I can give you one very essential theme to read about. It's what we call action research. Remember, action research, okay? Action research is a way of personal development, to develop yourself as far as teaching is concerned. For example, your reflections about a certain lesson. For example, you do a lesson, and when you go home, you try to reflect, to think about that lesson. whether it was good, whether it was not good, the drawbacks of that lesson, some problems that happened, etc. So you try to think about that so as you avoid the problems and the drawbacks you had. Another important thing for personal development or action research is through what we call pair observation. Pair observation. With your colleague, for example, you can attend each other class to get remarks. That remarks will help you to develop yourself. Okay, to develop yourself. This has to do with action research. So this is for pedagogy. Something very important that you might be asked about is ICT, Information Communication Technologies. So technologies can be used for teaching English, for example. How can we use technologies in teaching, for instance, reading or teaching grammar or teaching vocabulary, etc., etc. So this is what I mean by ICT. So remember, ICT is very important. So this is for English. Now let's talk about Arabic. So Arabic, we're not going to talk about it more than what we talked about in the content of the written exam, okay? In Arabic, try to read learning theories, but in this time, learning theories in Arabic, okay? In Arabic. Try to read about types of pedagogies, okay? Try to read about reforms in the Moroccan educational system. So you have to have a general idea about all the reforms that our educational system, the Moroccan educational system, has gone through. Try to remember objectives of each reform and whether that reform has succeeded or not. So try to expand, to widen your knowledge as far as these three topics are concerned. Okay, this is for Arabic. So for Arabic, you might get something like 2 questions, 3 questions maximum, okay? So not a lot of questions in Arabic, okay? Now let's talk about French, okay? We will also be asked some questions in French, okay? But this one is less important than these, especially than English, okay? So it is always short or brief, doesn't take a lot of time. So here in French, you might be asked to explain, okay? To explain something in French, or for instance, to define. They may ask you, for example, to define pedagogy in French or to define didactics in French, okay? Also, you might be asked to give opinion, to give your opinion, and you might be asked to translate, okay? So either you explain something, quote or expression or whatever, or to define a certain concept, okay? Or to give your opinion about something, or to translate, for example, a sentence or certain quote, etc. For example, I still remember I was asked to translate teaching is an art more than a science. So I was asked to translate this quote, okay, to translate this quote, okay. So here, what are you going to do is try to learn expressions of explaining, of defining, of giving opinion in French, okay. Try to learn expressions. So try to get ready for these kind of questions. And when we talk about Arabic has to do with education sciences. Okay, this is what these are all about. Okay, so try to expand your knowledge as far as education sciences in Arabic. And these are some topics you can read about, as I said, okay? All right. Another thing that you have to remember is that you might be asked to stand up and teach something. At home, try to be ready for this. They might ask you to stand up and teach, for example, present simple or present continuous, or teach, for example, prepositions of time or prepositions of place, etc. If you are asked to do this, pay attention to your handwriting on the board and also your voice projection. Pay attention to your voice projection if you are asked to teach something in front of the jury. So this is something that you might be asked either while you are sitting. They might ask you, for example, just to explain that. Just remember, for teaching grammar, always contextualize, okay? For example, give a short dialogue and student notice the grammar point in the dialogue, okay? Or they may ask you to stand up and go to the front next to the board and explain like you are in the classroom with students, okay, with student. All right, so this is something very important. Another thing that I'd like you to keep in mind is try to take it easy. Take it easy, don't be afraid, don't panic. This is something very simple. Just prepare yourself and I'm sure you will get it, okay? So this is all for for this session. I hope you find this helpful and fruitful. If you have any question or suggestion, don't hesitate to mention that in the comments. Have a good time, good luck, and goodbye.